Good afternoon, students. I just want to quickly um, give some concluding thoughts, remarks on a refutation of moral relativism uh, and the first reading that we did on the allegory. So I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of things that I think you might have gotten confused about. This is based on the reading reviews, some of the comments on the blog as well. And these are things that really shouldn't show up in your papers and should not show up on the final. So, for example, let's think about the allegory of the cave again. A number of you really like the allegory. I'm excited about that. It is a great piece of philosophical literature. But a number of you also, wrote things like, what the allegory teaches us is that we need more experiences. We need diversity of experiences. We need exposure to different cultures and things like that. Now, all of those things can be fine, and all of those things can be, neutral and have, maybe either zero effect or even a negative effect. I think they all, in a deep sense, miss the point of Plato's allegory, and the point of Plato's allegory is not just, it's not even a suggestion that we need to sort of broaden our horizons in terms of experiencing more things, tasting new foods, listening to music we might not normally listen to, experiencing cultures we might not experience. And part of the reason that we know that's not Plato's point is this: Socrates would have confronted plenty of people who actually sought after those types of experiences. And he would have discovered, I mean, he did discover that those people were just as ignorant or just as unconcerned about deep truths of humanity as those who live much more sheltered and cloistered lives. So, for example, I know lots of people. I travel the world. I go to India every January. I've been doing it for 7, 8 years. I go to China every summer and teach there. I've spent some time in Thailand, Cambodia. And this may be true of me, but it's certainly true of plenty of the people that I meet. These people that I meet traveling the world are very cultured. They have lots and lots of experiences. And nevertheless, if I start talking to them about what goodness is, and I do this fairly regularly, I talk to them about whether or not God exists. I talk to them about the notion of moral responsibility, rightness, wrongness, goodness, badness. I might talk to them about maybe issues of eternality. Is there such a thing as eternal? Do we live beyond death? Are we immortal? Things like that. Most of those people have spent zero to very little amount of time thinking upon such things, or the amount, or what they've thought about those things is extremely superficial. And these are people who are highly educated and who have traveled all over the world and experienced all sorts of different cultures. So my point here is that none of that is sufficient. None of that. It might be wonderful and great, and if you are a deeply reflective person, all those things can perhaps add depth to your life. But none of those things are sufficient to sort of force someone or even push someone to deeper reflection. In fact, many of the people who travel around the world end up having even goofier views about the nature of reality, the nature of goodness and badness, virtue, the good life, flourishing, happiness, things like that. So it's not sufficient, and so what that suggests is that's not at all what Plato is wanting to get at. In the allegory, what Plato wants is in a sense, take whatever experiences you've had and then meditate on them and think about them hard and see what they point to, and then see that, so your experiences point to something, and then that thing that they point to, that thing also points to something, which points to something, and reach rock bottom, go as far as you can in meditation and reflection and seeking out the truth and fundamental reality and what it is to be a human and the nature of goodness and beauty and rightness and wrongness. Plato thinks you can do that no matter where you are, no matter what your experiences have been. It just takes a lot of patience and it takes courage, and it takes a great deal of intentionality, a great deal of will, fortitude, focus. You have to be unrelenting in your pursuit of the truth. But instead, we just get distracted. And the other thing about the comments that I got on people traveling and exposing themselves to more experiences, becoming more uncultured and things like that, is a lot of the time, and this may be true for me too, we use those sorts of experiences as just yet another distraction from what really matters. So we can use work as distraction, we can use drink and food as distractions, sex as distractions, drug as distractions, alcohol as distractions, and we can also use travel. We can use education, that's a scary one, as distractions from really meditating and focusing and devoting ourselves to seeking fundamental, deep, deep truths about ourselves, about reality, the nature of the world, God, things along those lines. Okay, so that's about all I'll say about the allegory. Moving on to a refutation of moral relativism, just a couple of things to reiterate that are really important. One is, don't forget that Issa and virtually everyone involved in this conversation throughout the history of philosophy, Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, they think that this issue of moral relativism, moral absolutism, it's not merely a religious issue. It's a social issue, it's an individual issue, it's a national, cultural, it's an issue that affects all of us, by ourselves, in community, at church, in the shopping mall, watching television. It affects us all the time, our views about the status of morality. The second thing I want to sort of reiterate is this. Remember, when we're talking about moral absolutism and moral relativism, we're talking about it's a meta-claim. It's a claim about the status of moral statements. So take the statement, rape is wrong. Is that true? If it is it true for everyone at all times, in all places, independently of what we desire, feel, believe? Or does the truth of that statement just depend on whether or not we agree with it, whether or not we like it, whether or not our culture agrees with it or our culture likes it? The debate about moral relativism and moral absolutism is about what is the status of moral statements. It's not a debate about how to live your life or which moral statements are true and which moral statements are false. So for example, suppose I have a friend, let's call this friend Tyson. My friend Tyson, let's say he thinks that abortion is morally okay. And let's suppose that I think abortion is morally wrong. Tyson and I then disagree over the morality, the ethics of abortion. But both of us may very well be moral absolutists. Tyson thinks abortion is morally okay, and that's true for everybody at all times, independently of our beliefs, our feelings, or desires. I think, let's say, that abortion is morally wrong, and that's true for everyone at all times, independently of our desires, our beliefs, blah, blah, blah. Both of us are moral absolutists, so we disagree over the truth of a moral claim, but we both agree that generally moral statements are true or false independently of us, our desires, our psychological states. Okay, so moral absolute. So, for example, you can be a moral absolutist and think the Ten Commandments are awesome, and you could be a moral absolutist and think the Ten Commandments are, ancient relics of the past that should be discarded. What we're going to do as we move into the next book is we'll start putting meat on the bones. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next video. The other thing is, this is really important in the second lecture and then later on in the, I believe it's the 7th interview, when ICE is talking about, the Jean Valjean case, the Nazi case, act types, make sure you have an understanding of that. The main point here is this, is that morality, if you're a moral absolutist, then you think there are moral rules, standards, truths, moral facts that exist independently of you and your desires and your beliefs, but you're not an idiot. Right? The moral absolutist isn't a moron. The moral absolutist thinks that it takes time and patience and it takes maturity to figure out how to apply those rules to a particular situation. So is this a case of stealing, or is it a case of just mere taking? Is this a case of lying, or is this a case of mere uttering of a falsehood? Is this a case of murder, or is this a case of a mere killing, an accidental killing, a permissible killing, something like that? So the moral absolutist thinks that, you've got these rules exist independently of us, these facts that exist independently of us, but it takes a lot of wisdom and discernment and maturity to figure out how to apply them and what situations to apply them. The other thing, another thing that I wanted to mention is the notion of reductionism. So on reductionism, the key here is that being a reductionist in a particular area can be beneficial for a particular investigation, but it can often result in you blinding yourself, maybe purposefully, to particular areas of reality. So think about a physicist. I was a physics major in college. I love physics. So think about a physicist. A physicist sort of, in a sense, right, they abstract from all of the various noise that the world makes, right? So physicists typically aren't going to be interested in the amount of hair that people have. They're not going to be typically interested in eye color. They're not typically going to be interested in origins of persons, ethnicities, race. They're not going to be particularly interested in political organizations, how societies arrange themselves in economic organizations, how we distribute various goods amongst ourselves. Physicists are interested in a fairly limited range of topics. They're interested in various physical quantities that are measurable or not. Measuring is a fascinating problem. But they're interested in, very, very, very slim area that has wide-ranging impact, no doubt, but they're sort of ignoring a bunch of that other stuff for the purposes of getting on with physics. If they took into consideration all that other stuff, they'd never make any progress. So they ignore that stuff. Now, part of the danger is oftentimes we make some progress in a particular domain, a particular science or discipline, by ignoring some noise in the background, and then we try to say, that noise doesn't really exist, or that noise can be reduced to the thing that I'm most interested in. Speed of light, expansion of universe, things like that, entropy. That's what I'm really interested in, and I can reduce everything to that. So that's the danger of reductionism. Reductionism can be great when sort of limiting your focus to just a very, very thin slice of reality to try to make progress with that thin slice. That's wonderful, but oftentimes we then try to sort of shove everything into it. You've heard the quote, maybe Isa said this, I don't remember, that to the person who only has a hammer as a tool, everything looks like a nail. To the physicist who is just using the tools of mathematical frameworks and modeling and whatnot, everything starts looking like it fits into that package. And then when something doesn't fit into that package, like consciousness or morality or beauty, those sorts of things, then we say it doesn't really exist, or we attempt to sort of force it in to the package. A great analogy that a friend of mine uses is this. He says, if you're out on the beach using a metal detector, you're going to find some metal, right? And that's all you're going to find using that metal detector. So think of your metal detector, right? You're trying to find a bunch of stuff. What are you going to find with the metal detector? You're going to find metallic objects. Now imagine the person who finds some metallic objects and then declares, everything is metal. And you ask them why, and you say, well, because nothing else was discovered by my metal detector, right? No non-metal objects were discovered by my metal detector. Only metal objects were discovered by my metal detector, so everything is metal, right? We'd be right in thinking this person is kind of nuts, because the method that they're using is only going to discover metallic objects, right? And so to then declare that everything is metal is to ignore the limitations of the method. Okay. Another thing that I really want to highlight and make sure that you all got was the mic drop moment. I said, at the end of the dialogues, many of you might, and some of you did say this in your reading reviews, wow, it seems like, Isa's this super smart philosophy professor. Libby's, she's not as educated, she's not as articulate, she doesn't know all the stuff, and maybe if Isa had been debating someone who was a little bit more prepared, things would have gone differently. And so many of you might conclude, and I've had lots of students in my regular class conclude, this is unfair. Okay, so I think that's a mic drop moment, and here's why. It's unfair, right? If it really is unfair, maybe you're right, maybe it really is unfair. But notice that if it genuinely is unfair, then moral absolutism is true. Because there's a moral fact, the unfairness of the dialogue. that exist independently of us, independently of our desires and our feelings. If you say, no, 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 it's unfair, but that's just up to me, well, then someone might say, let's say I say, well, I don't think it's unfair. Well, then I'm right. It's not unfair. Right? So, those who say, oh, it's unfair, I don't like this. Moral absolutism is, you believe in moral absolutism. That's a big mic drop moment, I think. So please keep that in mind. Please remember that. Okay, I think that's it for concluding remarks. If I think of anything else, I'll maybe just post something written to the blog.